You are listening to 106.7 Wilmington. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com, sponsored by the Law of Self-Defense at lawofselfdefense.com, because the world is a dangerous place. We've been discussing the Jekyll and Hyde gun bill called H.R. 38, which now contains not only national concealed handgun reciprocity, but also the so-called Fix-Nix Act, which would result in more records being reported to the national computerized National Instant Background Check System. The problem is that the NRA signed off on language adding Fix-Nix to the bill. And although the Fix-Nix language doesn't add any new classes of prohibited people to the background check system, we've seen at least two examples, both from the so-called Nix Improvement Act of 2007, which resulted first in 260,000 veterans losing their gun rights, and then in 4.2 million Social Security recipients very nearly being treated to the same they would have been but for Donald Trump reversing the scheme. As I said before the break, this isn't the first time the NRA has supported gun control. Many of you are probably aware of the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Firearms Act, or PLCA, passed in 2005. It was the response to a raft of cities trying to use the tobacco litigation model to sue gun manufacturers out of business over the sale of their firearms that were not defective, but which actually functioned exactly as intended. The legislation passed, ending a major threat to gun manufacturers who were faced with dozens, if not hundreds, of abusive lawsuits. What you might not know is that wasn't the first time the PLCA was run by the NRA. In truth, they tried the year before that in 2004 with Senate Bill 1805. And did you know S. 1805 went to the Senate floor and got a bunch of gun votes? Maybe not, because most of them were decidedly not good, and a number of the bad ones passed. Among the things that the NRA allowed to be hung onto its bill with an amendment tree, there were, let's see here, Barbara Boxer's requirement that gun safety locks be sold with firearms. Well, that's not so bad. Then there was the requirement banning so-called armor-piercing ammunition, which they defined as any ammunition capable of penetrating body armor. Now, that could have been all rifle ammunition. Not so good. Then we had John McCain's bill, or amendment rather, to end the private sale of firearms at gun shows. And finally, the pièce de résistance, a 10-year extension of the so-called assault weapon ban, which passed in 1994, and you may recall was due to sunset, and actually did sunset, later that year in September of 2004. This amendment would have extended it for yet another 10 years, and you would be, you wouldn't be necessarily living it under right now, but pretty close. Anyways, Wayne LaPierre and the NRA continued to support S. 1805 until a coalition of gun rights organizations, of which I'm proud to say my organization, Grassroots North Carolina, was a member, hammered on the NRA relentlessly to withdraw its support. Some said the NRA would have endured almost anything to pass the bill, thanks to the millions of dollars Bill Ruger and his heirs at Ruger Firearms, the millions of dollars they donated to the NRA Foundation and its National Firearms Museum. In any case, when the NRA was forced to withdraw its support for the bill, S. 1805 went down in flames. The lesson here is that sometimes you need to let a polluted bill die in order to pass a good bill later. And indeed, the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Firearms Act passed as clean legislation the next year, 2005, as Senate Bill 397, sponsored by Larry Craig. Now, interestingly, during that same period of time, the NRA tried to do exactly the same thing here in North Carolina, where it was pushing legislation to stop cities in our state from suing gun manufacturers. Durham had threatened to, our own little Camden, New Jersey, and Durham. But Durham had threatened to sue, and even though the statutes in North Carolina are not well structured to actually sue a manufacturer over a properly functioning product, the NRA insisted it was going to pass this legislation here. Now, I wrote about this back in 2001 in a Charlotte Observer piece entitled "Strange Bedfellows and the Gun Show Loophole." In relevant part, it said, the NRA trying to pass legislation restricting cities from suing gun makers is chronically frustrated in the Senate. No matter how they kiss up to Senate leader Mark Basnight, including an undeserved endorsement, he denies them a committee hearing. Likewise, despite hiring big-buck lobbyists, North Carolinians Against Gun Violence is thwarted in its many efforts to impede gun shows. Since voters rejected gun control in the 1994 and 2000 elections, even Democrats are loath to stand up against gun owners, or at least they were then. They're not now. But Mecklenburg Senator Fountain Odom and lobbyist Joe McLeese, aided by Nicole Paglia, an ambitious if gullible NRA representative, have ended the standoff by allowing both to be merged into a single Jekyll and Hyde gun bill. There's that Jekyll and Hyde again. In May, Paglia informed me that Odom would amend Senate Bill 680, the NRA's moribund gun litigation proposal, to include all of Senate Bill 1097, an equally comatose gun show bill. In exchange, the Senate leadership, read that Basnight, would give the resulting legislation a hearing in a finance committee. The likely deal maker is McLeese, who seems to have his fingers in the pockets of most politicians in the legislature. Less clear, however, is whose interests McLeese holds most dear. Lobbyists, you see, constitute the world's second oldest profession. Although previously McLeese didn't bother to register as an NRA lobbyist, his firm apparently representing them nonetheless, he is currently registered not only for the NRA, but also for a melange of others, ranging from the Firearms Dealers Group to the Portable Toilet Group. Senator Odom's motivations are equally suspect. Although touting his NRA endorsement and sponsoring their bills, he also surfaces amid anti-gun efforts. In 1995, his subcommittee gutted the bill for our present concealed handgun law. When he threw the NRA a bone with a minor amendment to his own hatchet job, they rewarded him with an A+ rating and an endorsement. Presently, the NRA is handing out brochures lauding the benefits of Senate Bill 680 in restricting suits against gun makers while neglecting to tell NRA members the bill also requires them to register private gun sales. Paglia is even infuriating NRA's Republican supporters by ignoring Representative Wayne Sexton's straightforward gun litigation bill, even though it resoundingly passed the House and also resides in the Senate, where it's being held by NRA-endorsed Mark Basnight. Nor do the players want you watching their double-cross. When volunteers from my organization tried to videotape Odom's committee presentation — we often tape committees — Democrats ejected them from the allegedly public hearing. Lurking behind the scenes, North Carolinians Against Gun Violence lobbyists Bruce Thompson and Al Adams, who drafted the original gun show language, cheerfully let the NRA, Senate Democrats, and McLeese do their bidding. Everybody wins. The NRA succeeds in limiting gun litigation. Odom and Basnight push gun control under the cover of NRA endorsements, and North Carolinians Against Gun Violence gets to register private gun sales, and of course McLeese rakes in money. Well, everybody wins except you, of course. If you support gun shows, understand the NRA offered no objections when the Finance Committee passed Senate Bill 680. If you want gun makers sued into oblivion, which I don't think any of our crowd does, but this was not aimed at our crowd. If you want gun makers sued into oblivion, understand the NCGV is equally mute. In poll speak, you see, compromise is just another word for sellout. Thus we have the NRA's checkered history, And I could add more to it, by the way. We could talk about the Disclose Act. We could talk about the Nix Improvement Act of 2007 and a variety of other pieces of legislation, all of which have been duplicitous bills, I guess is the way to put it, that contained gun control that the NRA really didn't want to talk about. Now, we can talk about, we can conjecture their motives, sometimes perhaps to pass good legislation, sometimes their motives less pure. Nonetheless, what we need to realize is that we can pass clean legislation which doesn't have gun control, as we did with the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Firearms Act. Right now, we're going to take a break. My name is Paul Vallone. You have been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. When I come back, we will finish with our discussion of H.R. 38. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by the Law of Self-Defense at lawofselfdefense.com, because the world is a dangerous place. So far, we have discussed the Jekyll and Hyde aspects of the National Concealed Handgun Reciprocity Bill winding its way through Congress, which now includes a gun control measure which would incentivize additional reporting by federal agencies, not courts, I should note, additional reporting to the computerized National Instant Background Check System. We have discussed how the NRA is actually supporting gun control in order to pass its reciprocity bill, and how this by no means is the first time the NRA has supported gun control as part of its legislative initiatives, including pushing a bill here in North Carolina which would have resulted in the closure of most gun shows in the state. Now let's talk about some of the North Carolina congressional politicians behind H.R. 38, and perhaps a bit about their motivations. First of all, of course, we have Congressman Richard Hudson, Republican of Concord, who is H.R. 38's sponsor. To be honest, in the 8th congressional primary a few years back, we didn't support Hudson, but rather some of his perhaps more conservative primary election opponents. But, to his credit, he seems to be doing a passable job. He is indeed the only member of North Carolina's congressional delegation in recent memory to get a pro-gun bill to the U.S. House floor. However, all is not rosy in Conservativeville for Representative Hudson. He has apparently signed on to the NRA's machinations with respect to H.R. 38, including the addition of gun control to his bill, leading one major conservative North Carolina publication, the Daily Haymaker, to accuse him of, and I quote, providing cover for gun grabbers. The Haymaker notes that, and I quote, the bill encourages administrative agencies, not the courts, which is an excellent point, to submit more names to a national database that will determine whether you can or can't obtain a firearm. Further noting that the combination of pro-gun legislation with gun control is, and I quote, the classic bait-and-switch move that swamp dwellers use to pull one over on the American people, and Hudson is apparently willing to provide the bait in the form of his national reciprocity bill. The piece finishes by saying, and I quote, so if Hudson is really the gun rights advocate that he presents himself as, he should do everything in his power to undo the hijacking of the concealed carry reciprocity bill by the establishment gun snatchers that want to cloak a wolf in sheep's clothing to attack your Second Amendment rights. So I suggest we call Representative Hudson at his Concord office, where he lives, and tell him to immediately denounce the so-called Fix-Nix bill and remove all vestiges of H.R. 4477 from his bill. Representative Hudson's phone number is 704-786-1612. Again, that's 704-786-1612. And speaking of swamp dwellers, let's talk about Senator Thom Tillis, who, unlike Hudson, doesn't even bother to hide behind the fig leaf of national reciprocity. Nope, Senator Tillis is one of the co-sponsors of the Feinstein-Schumer gun grab in the Senate known as S-2135. Of course, Tillis is telling his constituents, and I quote, "I'm a proud sponsor of S-2135 because I believe this legislation strikes the right balance to make our country safer from violence while also being mindful of law-abiding Americans' right to the Second Amendment." Right to the Second Amendment. Anyways, it doesn't really make sense. But most telling, Tillis also says, and I quote, "The Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms for all law-abiding citizens, whether for self-defense, hunting, or recreation." Apparently somebody needs to remind a good senator that the Second Amendment has nothing to do with duck hunting and everything to do with preventing governments from becoming tyrannical. Oh, and whose support for the bill does he cite in insisting that he's a strong supporter of the Second Amendment? Why, the NRA, of course. This is a classic example of how the NRA tactic of allowing anti-gun legislation to be combined with its own agenda gives cover to the swamp dwellers. Let's give Senator Thom Tillis a little phone call and remind him who brought him to the dance, shall we? Senator Tillis's phone number is 202-224-6342. Again, call Senator Thom Tillis at 202-224-6342 and tell him to remove himself from the sponsor list of the Feinstein-Schumer gun grab. And finally, we have one honest legislator, one honorable legislator in the Jackal Pack. That is Congressman Ted Budd, who you may recall is also a gun shop owner. Budd's district is in the center of the state, encompassing Greensboro, parts of High Point, Lexington, and Statesville. Budd is a freshman, so I don't expect too much in terms of new legislation from him just yet. But what he has done is to circulate a letter picking up 39 signatures from other members of the House. And what he is doing is incorrectly anticipating, as I predicted earlier, by the way, that because the Senate will never pass national reciprocity, the bill will likely come back to the House after passing the Senate with only the Fix-Nix language and no reciprocity language. What the Budd letter says is, while we are pleased the House has been able to vote on and pass the concealed carry reciprocity bill to allow law-abiding gun owners with gun permits to carry firearms in any state that recognizes carry rights, we are concerned that the Senate will separate these two bills and pass just the Fix-Nix language, sending the measure back to the House without including the reciprocity language. So, and they strongly oppose that in the letter, of course. Now, I would advise Congressman Budd that you can't fix bad. What really needs to happen is that H.R. 38 needs to get passed without the Fix-Nix language altogether, but the guy's heart is in the right place. What is perhaps most telling here is who from the delegation has or has not signed on to Budd's letter. Despite alerts from Gun Owners of America and Grassroots North Carolina, the only two members of the North Carolina delegation to sign on were Congressman Robert Pittenger of Mecklenburg County and, of course, our ever-present defender of liberty in western North Carolina, Congressman Mark Meadows. Here, you should contact your own congressman and ask him why he didn't sign on to Budd's letter. Now, folks, I'm going to sign off for the holiday season and spend it with my family instead of haranguing politicians for a change. So on behalf of myself and Grassroots North Carolina, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We have lots of good stuff coming up in 2018, including the Second Amendment Symposium being held by Campbell University School of Law in Raleigh on February 1st and 2nd. The Campbell Symposium will be held on the 10th anniversary of the momentous D.C. versus Heller decision in which the Supreme Court affirmed an individual right to keep and bear arms in the Second Amendment. Campbell has attracted nearly all the main movers and shakers that made that decision happen, including Alan Gura, who argued the case, Dave Koppel of the Independence Institute, whose amicus brief was cited by the court, scholar Joyce Lee Malcolm, whose book was also cited in the decision by the court, noted scholar Glenn Harlan Reynolds, whose work has been featured in numerous law reviews and often in USA Today, and many more. Oh, and if you want a little fun, they also have Dennis Hennigan, the former head of Handgun Control Incorporated. That should be interesting. I'm proud to say that Grassroots North Carolina will be one of the sponsors of the Campbell University Forum, which is to be held on Friday, February 2nd, when it's open to the public, with numerous panel discussions I strongly urge you to attend. We will have lots more to say on that topic in the future. So once again, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. My name is Paul Vallone. You have been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7 WilmingtonBigTalker.com, where each Sunday at 5 p.m. as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your right to keep and bear arms. Please check out our sponsor, the Law of Self-Defense, at lawofselfdefense.com. Get a discount at lawofselfdefense.com/GPF. And I also encourage you to check out my website at gunspoliticsandfreedom.com. Spell out that "and," by the way. gunspoliticsandfreedom.com, where you can find both my writings and earlier editions of the show. See you next Sunday at 5.